folks. Greetings, grasshoppers. I am Dustin, and today I'm going to be joined. Let's see if you. Right now. Okay. Greetings, grasshoppers. I am live on Instagram, and today, got to hit the button one more time. Go. I should see you there shortly. Accept. Go live. There we go. You. Accept. Go live. Are you there, Randel? Not yet. Unable to join. Huh. Uh-oh. Might have to do this a third time. I accepted. Go live.
Hi.
Hey, there we are.
Yeah, it's a process. It's a process, you know.
I just kept hitting the button, and eventually.
Yeah, that's it. You got to bring out the hammer every now and then.
Sometimes. So let me do the introduction because I started the introduction and then
You're
kind of
good.
got a little. So I'm Dustin. I am one half of the Formless Podcast. Today I'm joined with the friendly Kung Fu bus driver, head coach of Red Forest Chinese Boxing, and one half of Kung Fu Conversations, Mr. Randel Davis. Thank you, sir.
Pleasure to be here, my friend.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversations over the last few months. They've been enlightening and very inspiring. And I always start with a quote, and this one's real short today, short and sweet. You can't pickpocket a naked man.
Oh, that's great.
So,
That's great.
not that anyone wants to see me naked, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
You know, I honestly think that quote is almost as, you know, in the literal sense, but in the philosophical sense too. You know, pickpocketing a naked man philosophically anyway would be somebody that's open and not hiding or concealing. And so, you know, you can't steal their thoughts because they're willing to share those. So I kind of think that's pretty great.
Yeah. It's that. I heard it on another podcast. This guy was kind of bearing his soul, and it was really interesting. And that's what the host said. It was basically like, you know, if you don't hide anything, you can't. Nobody has anything to use against you. And it was pretty neat. So we found each other through Instagram, or I believe, I don't know who found who, but
It was actually Brian Doucette found both of us.
that's right. Yes, because you were on his show,
Everyday Martial Artist.
Everyday Martial Artist as well. Yeah. So we're all podcasters with martial arts focus, and Brian Doucette's probably got one of the biggest martial arts centered podcasts, I think, out there. And he interviews everyone that's a martial art.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
I felt really honored to be a part of that. As you look at you look at his list of people that he's interviewed and talked to, and it's like, oh cow, that's some rare air.
I think not only is it an honor, but it's kind of cool because you listen to these Hollywood movie stars, these professional fighters, et cetera, you know, the big names that we grew up with, whether it be from the movie industry or even the fighting industry. And their stories are very unique, but wildly similar to us everyday martial artists.
Absolutely.
And I think that was one of Brian's focuses on the show, He even talks about it when he does the opening. He's like, I have guests that everyone's heard of, and then maybe people you haven't. And it really focuses on that journey. So it's less of, yes, they're a high celebrity, but listen to their story. You might find something that resonates with you that you've been a part of yourself.
Yeah, yeah, it's very much a human story, and it's just so cool, so cool.
Very much so.
So yeah, you're a coach or a teacher, however you prefer coach, I believe, right?
I do. I
And
do. I do.
one of the things that I've been itching to ask you is how did you get started with Kung Fu and why Kung Fu and not wrestling or boxing or any of the other, take it
Well,
further.
I did start with wrestling. Let's start with my first interest. It was 1984. I was 5 years old, and my parents took me to see The Karate Kid. And that started a lot of people off. And there was a scene, as we know, the late, great Fumio Demura was doing the stunt work and the actual fighting in The Karate Kid. And, you say it out loud and it sounds awful, and maybe it is. Maybe it dates the whole storyline, but it was at the Halloween dance, and Daniel is getting beat up by our Cobra Kai kids in their skeleton costumes, and Miyagi leaps the fence and quickly dispatches these teenage boys with a strike each. And it wasn't the fighting that intrigued me. I've always been a fan of movement, and I love pattern also. And after that scene, you see, it goes back to Pat Morita, and he is shifting in the cat stance with his
Yeah.
guard hands. And at 5 years old, I still remember it was a thought that echoes with me 40 years later, and that is, why is he moving like that? And I've never seen anybody move like that, and I want to know why. Why is he moving like that? And I grew up in the mountains of a small town in Colorado. Physical culture was a part of my home. We were not spiritually or mentally poor, but we had to work for things a little bit extra, if that makes sense.
Yes, sir.
And so we had a wood burning stove. My first job, and I'm not lying about this, was for my dad. He was a selective cut logger, meaning that we didn't clear cut the forest. BLM would go in and mark the trees that they wanted down, and we'd sell those for fence post, which are 6.5 foot exact length, and then the diameters was 6.5 rounds to 8 inches round. And my job at 10 and 11 and 12, I had a little hatchet and 3 little come along ropes, and I would delimb the trees, and I would drag them down the hillside, and I would load those logs up on the truck, and that was $10 a day. But we would also drag out the deadwood of the forest floor, and we had to have firewood for the winter. And then we also sold firewood for the winter by the cord. And I was the wood splitter. So you had a little chubby 10-year-old out splitting, my dad was really cool about things. He's like, I'm going to pay you money and I'm going to feed you well, which I got paid $10 a day, and I got to eat all of the good, bad food in the world, which I absolutely loved. But we had a great boom box. We had this GE boom box, and up in our mountain town, it had one of those huge telescoping antennas, and he would plug that sucker in for me outside, and it would be freezing cold. He'd have it covered so it wouldn't get snowed on, and it would be cranking rock and roll, classic rock, and I'd be so happy out there splitting firewood. I loved it. It was an addiction for me. And then I went on to football. As a freshman, I started late into my wrestling career. I started high school wrestling as a freshman in high school, and I was awful at it. And I did it my sophomore year, and I was awful at it, but I liked the work ethic, the community. My coaches were great. They were hard on me when they needed to be, and they were kind and loving when they needed to be. They were really good in a foundation of what a good teacher can be for me. And they knew when to push me, and they knew when to, okay, why don't you take a break? You're doing good. but you're looking a little overheated. Why don't you rest in the corner or take a lap and get some water, those kind of things. And so, my high school coaches were so great in my foundation of how to train and what training is and what the results you can get from training. And so that always stayed with me. And then, there was nothing up in the mountains. There was absolutely nothing. Denver was a 3.5 to 4 hour round trip from where we lived, and, there wasn't even really Taekwondo until
stop you for just one
yeah,
second.
yeah, go ahead.
So what town in Colorado? Because my wife was born in Wyoming, but she grew up in Colorado.
Oh.
And if we don't ask you, I'm going to be in deep trouble.
Okay.
So,
It was Granby.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's in the middle of Grand County, and 15 miles north is Grand Lake. That is the western entrance to the Rocky Mountain National Park. Estes Park is the eastern entrance. And then 15 miles to the south of Granby is the Winter Park ski area, one of the top 10 ski areas in the area.
I've never been to Colorado, but my wife probably knows everything that you just talked about. So.
Yeah, I'm sure she does. Do you know where she grew up?
She went to the border, or high school. Oh my Lord, I'm in so much trouble.
Well, we'll have to ask another time.
Drawing a blank.
Well, you need to get to Colorado and come train with me. We've already talked about that too.
That's on the short list of goals. Buddy.
Yeah. So I went to college. I went to Mesa State, which is now Colorado Mesa University, my old alma mater. I spent a doctorate amount of time there. I spent 6 lovely years there, and I don't have a doctorate. From 98 to 04. And as a freshman, there was a judo club, and the price was pretty affordable. And I missed wrestling. We actually did some Greco-Roman wrestling as well. A lot of it we couldn't use for the the collegiate high school freestyle style of wrestling, but it was fun. We kind of did it extra just for a little different, like a different look at things. Coach thought it was good because it was a different way to use the body in the grappling style. So we looked at Greco, and I loved Greco. I think I was better at Greco than I was our high school freestyle wrestling. Different things connect with different people.
Yeah.
And so, my coach told us, all is like, hey, if you ever get a chance, and you're off in college and you miss, wrestling and stuff, you might try judo, especially if you liked the Greco. And so I joined the judo club, and I really loved it. And at the same time, the head of the math department, Ed Bonan Hamada, was just starting his Wing Chun journey. He had brought in Sifu Herbert Mayer, who is now my Sifu, and the only fully certified representative of the Wong Q lineage of Wing Chun.
Wow.
And so Ed was bringing Sifu Mayer up from around Houston, Texas area once or twice a year. And he had just started in 98, the Wing Chun Club. And so Ed and I the other thing too is I joke about this too. We had a pretty good gym for a small town in the mountains in high school. And I was kind of, on top of the weight, the splitting wood and being out in nature and playing football and stuff like that. I really liked lifting weights. It was kind of one of those things. My dad's like, well, if you want to do football and wrestling, you want to split wood well, go lift some weights, blah, blah, blah. And not much formal training, anything like that. And so I get to college, and the rec center is enormous. I mean, their rec center at Mesa was the size of my high school. And I'm like, holy cow, look at all these weights and look at all these machines and blah, blah, blah. And so if I wasn't in class or studying or doing judo, I was at the gym. And the first month and a half of college or so, I would walk to the gym about the same time Ed was about to teach his Wing Chun class, and we would just talk the entire time. And we had a blast. And finally one day he's like, you've got a good personality, Randel. Why don't you come try the Wing Chun class? I'm like, okay, well, let's give it a shot. And another interjection real quick. growing up in that small town, I did have a friend that I grew up with, was like an older brother to me, very protective. And he would go down about twice a month, and he would train Taekwondo for half the day, and then he would train Ed Parker Kempo Karate for half the day. And then he would come back up. He was a couple of years older than me. And so I got to be the punching bag. And, I guess I learned how to receive a throw and a kick and a fall better than anything. But I would get my little bit of chances because he knew I was always into martial arts. So I kind of got a taste of that as well, but nothing that really stuck. The wrestling stuck with me more than anything. And so I joined the Wing Chun Club, and I fell in love with it about after a third or fourth class. It was very challenging. But what I loved about the Wing Chun was it was so foreign. I had no idea what it was and where it came from. But I liked that it was ambidextrous. I never felt comfortable with a lead side, because the little bit of, Taekwondo and, the Ed Parker Kempo that I was shown, there was usually a lead side. And I never felt quite comfortable with that. It never just resonated with me, or maybe I just didn't train it enough or have enough formal understanding of it, since it was just a couple of buddies getting together.
Yeah.
And there were reasons why we were ambidextrous and had the front facing stance. And I liked that. And I am one to, if somebody tells me to do something, I usually try to do it. I won't question a lot. But if somebody gives me even one reason of what I'm going to get out of my training, oh man, then I'm going to have that much more fervor. I'm going to have that much more reason to do the training. So Ed, and then, training the seminars with Sifu Mayer was that way. It'd be like, okay, you're going to get this and this if you do your training like this. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh, those are two things. Those are two tangible things that I can hang my hat on. So I'm going to do that training. And then they would go, and it was always magic to me because it's layered. You learn the same thing over and over again, but you learn a deeper understanding of it. It's like, okay, this is why we're doing this, and this is why we're doing this. And then 6 to 9 months later to a year later, you're like, okay, here's another reason why you're doing it. And that other reason connects to the two other things that you're doing over here. And all of a sudden, the physical and the mental side of the training start to coalesce and mesh into each other. And I was like, man. So yeah, just 6 years later, I went on to Metro State, and I did amazing there, but I decided that teaching wasn't my cup of tea. So I left Metro State after a year and went back to my hometown of Granby and Winter Park in about late 04, 05-ish. And I just kept training with Sifu Mayer, and eventually would become his Colorado representative. And then I'll wrap it up real quick because I don't like to talk too much about myself. I kept working with him, worked with a lot of other schools around Colorado to introduce Wing Chun, and picked up some of the. I kind of dabbled, worked with this person over here, worked with that person over there. And in 2011, I had a girlfriend. We had moved in together. We moved down to the Front Range. She was wrapping up another degree at Colorado State, and I transferred. I was my last 2 years up in the mountains. I was the Winter Park bus driver for the ski bus, okay. And so I transferred with the company down to Longmont, which was only a 25-mile drive for me, and then college was, she was working on her other degrees, was only like a 15-mile drive for her. After 9 months, it didn't work out between us, but the job worked out really well. So I guess there's that to go for it. But I was in kind of a dark place. I had packed up from home, lost the love of my life and stuff like that. And somewhere in the middle of that, in the summer times, I trained a couple years in a Southern style also called White Eyebrow or Pakme. It's a Southern Tiger system. And I became really good friends with the senior student who was 31 years my senior. I met him when I was 19 and he had just turned 51, 52-ish. And Steve and I just kept in touch all over the years. And for somehow, I always say that, he knew it through the force, or maybe a mutual friend of ours reached out to him. It's like, hey, Randall's only 30 miles away from you guys, and he's kind of in a rough spot right now. emotionally. Maybe you should invite him to come train with your new group. And Steve had moved from White Eyebrow and then found Owen, my co-host of the Kung Fu Conversations podcast. Owen was teaching Boulder Internal Arts. It's a Yizong school, which teaches the Chen Pan Ling style of Tai Chi, no relation to the Chen family, Hebei Xingyi, and then Gao Yi Xing style of Bagua. So the three Chinese internal arts. And at the time, he was really pushing the Xingyi because Bagua is very complicated. It is very complicated on the body to get it right, the coordination, things like that. And Xingyi is also complicated, but the barrier to entry is a little bit easier. And so he realized that some of his Bagua students weren't quite getting what they needed. So he's like, okay, we're going to go back to Xingyi, really get the power method good and clean from the Xingyi, and then you can step into the Bagua. And so when I walked in there, I was just kind of there to work with some people. I was in a dark spot. I always believe that moving and training differently gives you a different feeling and a different mindset. Yeah. And so I was not looking for really a new martial art, but a new movement method, a new way to feel, a new way to think.
Just get out of it.
That's exactly right. And so my fifth lesson in, there was a sweet older woman there, Alexandra, who I love to death. And I won't say how old she is. I do know how old she is. But at the time, let's just say she was in her early 70s. And I'm not very tall. I'm 5'5", but I'm a big stocky dude. I'm about 220, 225. And Alexandra is about 5'4", and she's maybe a $110 on a good day. And we were working on joint locks, and I've never been really good or worked with a whole bunch of joint locks. And I'm being a good uke, if you will. I'm letting her, apply it and stuff like that. And then after about the third or fourth time, I felt a little frisky. I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to let her have this joint lock. And so I start kind of cranking in some muscle, to kind of counter it. And she was still getting it. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, no, I'm not going to let her have this. And so I'm starting to wrench my whole body to counter this joint lock that she's doing. And the second I started to wrench my body into it, I'm laying on the floor looking up at her. And I'm like, how the hell did that happen? And so I'm like, okay, maybe there's something in this class, and maybe there's something to this teacher and this method. And so I just threw myself into it. The first 3.5 years, I would come home from a 10-hour shift, and I'd be an hour to an hour and a half to 2 hours of training every day because I had nothing else. I didn't have cable. I watched the same movies so much, and so I just threw on some tunes. And my little apartment was right in front of, a blacktop paved parking lot. And I'd just be out there line drilling up and down that parking lot doing the Xingyi forms, which is great because, it's 3 moves on one side of your body, and then it brings forward the other side of your body, and then it's 3 moves on the other side, and then it brings forward this side. And then there's the turn, and so you could turn around and do it again. So, yeah, Xingyi saved my life.
That's rad. That is so awesome. Very cool. And so you still practice the Xingyi, and you still do, and then you still have your Wing Chun clubs, cool, right? Right on now. And how long has the Wing Chun Red Forest Chinese boxing been going?
I want to say I thought of that. I want to say about the ideas were forming in about 2005 because I had done some other stuff and I really liked it as well. And I thought it added on to the training. Like I'd done the White Eyebrow for 2 summers, had some forms, had some drills from there. I had worked with a lot of Southern arts. I really loved the Southern arts. They're very practical. They're very easy to get into, and they hit the ground running a little bit, So I had done some Southern White Crane. Pak Mei is very similar to Southern Dragon. As a matter of fact, Lam Yu Kwai and Chang Lai Chung trained together quite a bit. They were friends when they were younger and then wound up being like distant cousins through a marriage. And so they were buddies, and they were training buddies and partners. And so they worked together quite a bit. And so there's very many similarities. So I met a guy that did that. Southern Dragon, Lung Ying, and we traded notes. And not so much on the white eyebrow, but he was really interested in how Wing Chun was structured, like the teaching and the philosophies on the teaching side of things. And so I traded some notes with him. So I got a few drills over here, worked with some Southern Mantis people. One of my buddies actually at Mesa that was doing the Wing Chun with me, we always called him Mantis Scott. And Mantis Scott, I actually had other, the story goes on at Mesa too. So Mantis Scott had trained for 12 to 15 years in a hybrid family style of Mantis that was a little bit of Northern and a little bit of Southern. And so he wanted to keep up on that. So my buddy Caleb and I, we would go train with Mantis Scott and just buy him lunch. And so we were doing the Northern, on top of the judo. And then I met another guy my last few years at Mesa that did White Tiger and some Bagua and some Shingi also. Sifu Bill Johnson. I call him my hippy dippy Sifu. He was my first dip of the toe into the esoteric. And how much of it I bought into, not so much. I just liked Bill. And sometimes I think we need to train with people that we like. And maybe, I don't care about the system or, the training. It's just, what am I getting with working with this person?
Yeah.
Because that is something as well. And so, yeah, I'd had all this stuff. And so I'm like, well, I can teach not just the Wing Chun, but I've got these other little goodies and stuff like that. And so about 2005, I was thinking about Red Forest Chinese boxing. I love the color red. I grew up in the mountains. I love the forest. And I was, working outside in the forest all the time. And then, sometimes you'll hear Chinese martial arts referred to as Chinese boxing. So that's where that came in. And then, '09, I really pulled the trigger on that. So, yeah. But now mainly I focus on Wing Chun. I'll show Xingyi, but people have to be willing to put in the work. I think it's one of those arts that unless you're willing to train the heck out of it, you're not going to get very far with it. Mm-hmm. Owen and I've actually talked about that on the show, and I've heard other people say that too, is if you're not getting the correct power method out of Xingyi, then the applications don't really work that well. Basic self-defense works better than the Xingyi applications if you don't have the correct power method, because the applications rely on the usage of force. And it's not the same as how much can I bench press and how much can I squat, those kind of things. And then about 2 years ago, I started into the Bagua. It's hard to sin. And I just dabble in that. I call that my vitamin. If you have a healthy diet, you're getting most of your nutrients and minerals from your food. But every once in a while, maybe it's been a long winter, you need a little vitamin D or something like that. Bagua is my supplemental art. And so, yeah. So that's a lot of my martial journey and a lot of my martial training. So
something to dabble in on the side there.
That's right.
Yeah. That's funny. You mentioned it as a vitamin. I always say it's my dessert. So.
Ooh, I like that. Maybe I'll recalibrate that. I like that. Yeah.
There you go. That's really awesome. Always been interested in Wing Chun. The style that we practice here at our school, it's they're related. So it's a American style martial arts that takes from Wing Chun, and then a Korean Kung Fu training style, which is pretty much dead style. There's no active people in it. It's not commonly confused with Kung Sudo. But it was its own thing, and I love the aspects of the hard and the soft styles, and lots of fun. Just anytime we can dabble in it. We have a 4-day-a-week structured classes, and then Saturday lately I've been teaching that one, and we just dabble in all sorts of different stuff. And today we did a little dirty boxing and some Wing Chun applications there, and then a little sprinkled in a little Muay Thai. Just anything and everything. It's like a grab bag class,
That's great.
That's great. So much fun.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I don't think a lot of people And there's a reason for it. The Korean government wants it that way. There are hundreds of styles in Korea.
Yeah.
But the government sponsors mainly a few. That's it.
Yeah.
You got Taekwondo, you have Hapkido, and you have what is that other style? Muksol Kwan, those kind of things.
Yeah.
Tang Sudo. And then what is it? Taekyoken or something like that. There's a kicking style that's very interesting out of Korea. That's to me, it's the only other style that reminds me of capoeira a little bit because it's somewhere between a dance and a kicking method. And it's fascinating. But yeah, they have their own knife fighting systems up there. They have systems from all over. As a matter of fact, tell you an interesting story. And I've got two people that I'm pretty good. One is a good acquaintance, hopefully a good friend someday. Sifu Keith Martin Smith, who has a great name for a country or folk singer, has a system. It's another White Tiger system, no relation to the one that Bill taught.
Okay.
The one that Bill learned was out of southern China. This system is a northern long fist Chinese boxing system, and it's out of Korea. And his teacher was out of Korea. And he's had really high-level teachers. Well, who is it? Not Sherman Ding. Who's the gentleman that's the Shaolin monk that moved to New York like 35 years ago and has been teaching out of, it might be Sherman, I can't think of that guy's name. But anyway, there's a Shaolin monk that's been in New York for like 30-something years. And he was one of the first monks to move to the U.S. and start teaching. Sifu Keith had learned from him. I believe he had worked under Sifu Brian Gray, who, if you remember in the 90s, like Inside Kung Fu Magazine and Black Belt, he'd be in these gray robes, and then he'd be breaking coconuts and stuff like that, because he was one of the Iron Palm guys. And then he met his Sifu. I can't remember where he met his Northern Long Fist teacher. And I remember Sifu Keith talking about the first time he met. He saw the Chinese characters, and he walks into the school, and, the teacher told him, where his martial arts were from and stuff like that. And he asked, hey, Sifu Keith, or he asked Keith, he's like, can I see one of your katas? And so Keith did one of his hardest forms, and he's huffing and puffing. And he goes up to the guy, he's like, what did you think? He's like, you have power. You have this. You have the coordination. You have timing. You have all this. No one ever taught you how to breathe. And Keith's like, whoa, okay, there's something here. And so he started learning from his teacher and teaches locally in Boulder, Sifu Keith does, but he also is a published author. He is a certified Zen priest in Rinza, the old Japanese style of Zen Buddhism. And his teacher was Zhengpo, and is has published a few books with Zhengpo. He actually just had a great book come out 2 years ago, When the Buddha Needs Therapy. That is a great book for anybody. Sifu Keith Martin Smith, When the Buddha Needs Therapy. And the school that I teach at, that I'm honored to teach at, Denver Shaolin and Tai Chi, which is also known as 5280 Shaolin, their Shaolin also comes from Korea. And I've seen what the temple does, like now, and I've seen what they do for their kung fu. And if I had a choice to learn, I would much rather learn what Sifu John, Sifu Chris teach down in Denver. Sifu John right now is in Seoul learning from his teacher right now.
Very cool. Very cool. That's awesome. I saw this morning you had a post about a book that, did you write the foreword to it?
No. It's this book right here. So one of our guests on Kung Fu Conversations, and is known throughout the world, I like him quite a bit. Some people find him somewhat controversial, but I think that's when you're doing something right? Yeah. Shifu Jonathan Bluestein, Martial Arts Politics Explained. You can find this book anywhere on Amazon, and he has decided, this is like his 4th or 5th book he's published, probably more than that. And Sifu Jonathan does Southern Praying Mantis. I think he does some Baji and Pigwa. and then he also does Xingyi. And then recently he found like a family method, like a folk style of Shaolin, and he's been learning that as well. They're tiger sets. So yeah, he's an acupuncturist, Chinese medical doctor. He's a massage therapist. He's got all kinds of titles, which is great, as well as being an author. And he finally decided that, nobody's ever talked about martial politics, and it's a nasty one. And so he's like, well, maybe it's time that somebody talked about it, and talked about the, 10,000-pound elephant in the room. And he was kind enough. We had talked in passing after he was on the show. We had kept in contact, and he's like, hey, that one story you told me was really interesting, and I'd love for you to write it, and if you'd be willing to share it. And so it's pretty short. It's only 4 or 5 pages, but my contribution was not my rivalry, and it talks a little bit about some of the things that I learned from coming from Wing Chun and studying at a wide eyebrow school, and it was really interesting. So yeah, but yeah, there's a little piece I wrote for his book, and it's just a small smattering because the rest of it is so beautiful, so thick. There's stories from other teachers throughout the world of Chinese martial arts, as well as Japanese arts. And then, Sifu Bluestein, he really delves into the politics, what's still useful, and what, in his opinion, because he talks about that a lot, may be holding back the Chinese martial arts from being here in another 50 to 100 years. So it's pretty good, very controversial. One you should get your hands on.
Definitely look forward to reading that. That's cool, though. I mean, not very many people could say they contributed to a book like that.
It's fascinating because I'm very outgoing, as you can tell, and my co-host is very introverted. Unless it's martial arts, then he's got something to say. But the podcast was not my idea. It was actually Owen's, and it's amazing how COVID changed a lot of people. And Owen and I, we'd still get together, we'd have lunches, things like that, and we'd just have these great talks about teaching and life and martial arts and things like that. And Owen finally, during COVID, he's like, why don't we pull the trigger? He's like, I used to do radio a long time ago. He's like, but it's been, almost 30 years, so I'm going to be gun shy. But I think if it's just you and I can kind of get over that. And so the first year we did the show, it was just Owen and I, and we were figuring out a lot of things on the technical side, on the the talking side, the topic side, and the first 1 through 19 episodes, the audio's so. Yeah. It's okay. I've heard worse podcasts. I've heard better, but we figured out the audio thing since then. But if you can tough out the audio, there's some pretty good stuff for a rookie podcast getting up. And and I've met people. That's how that happened. We got to talk to Sifu Douglas Wong, who was a part of his teacher and himself were extras and were the martial arts consultants for the TV series Kung Fu.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and we've talked to lineage holders. I'm going to ruin this one. Our next podcast that's coming out next Friday is part 1 with Nabil Renee, and Nabil teaches Chen Tai Chi. He is a student of Chen Yu, who Chen Yu is the grandson of Chen Fa Ke. And Chen Fa Ke is the guy when it comes to Chen Tai Chi. And he does the Beijing line. And the Beijing line, if you ever look at it, and then you look at what the folks in the village are doing, is much different. And there's a lot of politics in that too. I'm not going to get into it. But it looks different. It's applied differently. And so it makes you ask the question, why? Mm-hmm. And if I had to choose one, I would definitely be working with Nabil. Not to downcast what the village people are doing. They've got their own reasons. They've got their own syllabus and their own training. But I just think what Nabil is doing is, for me, resonates more. And so he's going to be our next guest that's coming out in a 2-part episode. It'll be this Friday or next Friday and then the following Friday. And then we drop the YouTube episodes afterwards. And then we've got a couple of other great guests lined up to round out the year. And, we would have more guests and we would do more podcasts. But like yourself, we're 9 to 5 guys. And we have other duties other than the podcast. The podcast is fun. It's a joy, and I absolutely love it, and Owen does too. But it does take work, and it does take time. And it takes time away from loved ones, work, downtime, training, et cetera, et cetera. So we love the podcast, but it is it's our fifth thing, if you will. So
yeah. And priorities are priorities, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
No, I'm in the same boat there. Tyler and I started right after we got our black belts. We were just talking because right now our school, there's 3 schools. We got one here in California, actually 2 here in California, and then one in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and that's it. And we were talking about like, it's awesome. We love it. How what's our part in this? What's our part to make this, at least sustain it? We would love to make it grow, but like, what can we do to sustain this to keep it rolling? And back and forth and talking, and it's like, well, I don't know, maybe something like a podcast. And Tyler's like, that's great, let's do it. Well, let's start tomorrow. And he's like, I've got this recorder that I use for my movie stuff, and I'll bring it. We'll meet up, blah, blah, blah. And next thing I know, we're sitting at a table and talking for an hour and 45 minutes about martial arts and life and everything. Much like you, the first few episodes are a little shaky, and just continue to improve and get a little better each one. And wild, it's super fun.
Yeah, I found that with podcasting, a little bit like martial arts, there's a white belt level. You walk in as a rookie, and the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. And the days that you don't feel like it are the days that you need to do it.
Yeah.
And, making time for it. And I honestly feel like the world of podcasting, if I could give anybody some advice, and I think I gave you this advice, is just to stick with it and have a routine. If you're going to do it weekly, do it weekly. If you decide that weekly is too much, we are a bi-weekly podcast. Mm-hmm. It feels like we're putting stuff out weekly, but no. Here's our formula. We'll put out the Spotify, the Apple Cast, the Amazon stuff. We'll put that out all at the same time. If it's Owen and I stuff, like if it's just him and I bantering, those episodes are 15 to 35 minutes at the most. And so we'll drop that on a Friday. And then the following Friday, we'll drop the YouTube episode. So it's something every week, but it's the same thing. It's just now on YouTube. So each audience can look forward to, because YouTube's really pushing their podcasting platform. And so we get something for our YouTubers. They might have to wait a little bit longer, but they're still going to get the goods.
Yeah.
And then, for our interviews, if there's a certain time limit, we'll decide, is it going to be a 1 episode or is it going to be a 2 episode? Like with Nabil, I think we talked to Nabil almost 2 hours. And so that's a 2 episode podcast. So we'll release the Spotify episode next Friday, part 1. And then the following Friday, we'll release part 2, but that was done as a whole, right? And so it's releasing the other half of the same thing. And then the following Fridays, we'll release part 1 and 2 of the YouTube podcast. So it's the same thing for a month. And so the interviews have really taken off a lot of the pressure that Owen and I have for our own podcast.
To keep that wheel rolling. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And the cool thing about it is and I think you guys might find this too, the more people you interview, they're going to give you perspectives that you've never thought about of your material, of why you're training it, how to teach it, what you're getting with the group training, what you're getting with your solo training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What is an application? How is power developed? Why are we using these stances, these structures, these postures? And so as you get these different perspectives, that becomes food and fuel for you guys to discuss on your own show. And so that's a lot of also the reason we interview people is, I might up my teaching game just by like, hey, have you guys tried this? No, that's a great idea. I can use that. And maybe I can use it and it wouldn't quite work for maybe Xingyi or Bagua, but maybe it works for the Wing Chun. Or maybe it's something that Owen's like, yeah, I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that for Xingyi. And I'm like, that doesn't quite fit the Wing Chun criteria, but I'm super stoked that Owen gets to use it for Xingyi because that means when I go to class, I get to use it.
You get to use it. Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's almost a selfish thing. It's almost like
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I mean, you're putting yourself out there, but you get so much more insight and so many more ideas and things, and you just bounce stuff back and forth, and it's exciting. It's real exciting.
We talk about why we do the show. As a matter of fact, I think either this month or next month, we were honored. One of our, just like Jonathan, was a previous guest, and he asked me to help out with this. One of our previous guests, Robbie Kuntz, he is part of the Dao Yi podcast, which is well worth your time if you're not familiar with the Dao Yi podcast. It's an acronym. Excuse me. It stands for Taoist Arts Organization International.
Okay.
I think I could get that. And they have some great interviews. They just had a really good roundtable discussion with 3 different Tai Chi practitioners. Then they were trying to get the pulse or the state, if you will, of where Tai Chi is right now and where it's going to go and what it's doing and what it's not doing, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And that was a really great one. But Robbie had us on as guests for our podcast. We told our martial backgrounds and what we were hoping for with the podcast. And Owen and I, like I said, are both, he grew up in a small town in Colorado also. He grew up in a small town called Lyons, which is 20 miles outside of Boulder, which isn't far from a big city. But Owen's a few years older than me. I want to say he's going to be 53 or 54 this year. So when he grew up in Lyons in the 70s, Boulder was not big.
Yeah.
Boulder was maybe a town of 12, 15,000 people. And Longmont was, same thing, 25, 30,000 people. These small cities also didn't have a whole lot of resources. And Lyons was tiny back then. We're talking 200 or 300 people in the whole town. And so, he's like, I had a small town radius. I'd go pick on grandma. I'd go pick on a horse in the pasture. I'd go to school. And then he's like, and we walked everywhere, those kind of things. So he's like, I watched Kung Fu on TV and I fell in love with it. And so they asked us, and getting back to the Dao Yi podcast, why are you doing the show? Well, one, we kind of feel like it's like a living history because we've read magazine articles from some of these masters, but it's written. But to hear their tone and to hear their inflections on their styles, their students, their teaching, and all these other things, that's a living history. Yeah. So we get to be a part of that. But 2, I always find that it's like, okay, what if I was in a small town? Let's say I'm in a small island on Alaska, not even one of the Aleutians, but one of the ones that are closer to Victoria, BC. And I don't have a whole lot of resources, and I'm on a small island of 800 people, and I'm the only martial arts instructor. And I get stuck in a rut with my teaching style and my teaching method. I believe that podcasting are a great resource for these teachers in these small areas that have no one to spitball ideas off of. And so they get to listen to other people's training styles, what they present, how they present the material. Because I really believe that being a martial artist and being a teacher are two different skill sets. Just because you're a great martial artist does not mean you're going to be a great teacher. And just because you're a great teacher doesn't mean that you're a great martial artist. You might be a mediocre at best martial artist, but really understand the system and how to convey that information to somebody else. And so for these little islands of people, wherever they are, man, woman, whatever they are, werewolf, werecat, whatever they are, if they're teaching martial arts, we want to have this show out here where, you and Tyler, myself and Owen, we spitball ideas at each other and we hash out these conversations. And we don't always have to agree on stuff too. You can not agree with somebody and still like, love, and respect them. That's another thing that I think needs to be talked about. Speaking of martial arts politics.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with just about everything you said there. I believe it adds fuel to the fire. I listen to your show. There's a few other shows, and it's just, I want to get out on the mat. I want to do stuff. It inspires me to go and learn and not that I need that motivation, but it gives me something to look forward to at the end of the week.
Absolutely.
And it's like,
Absolutely.
I can't wait. I got this new idea and I heard it from Owen and Randel, and I can't wait to try it out. I can't wait to see how this works. And we might do it once, we might do it 10 times. It's there. And it's like that light bulb's on and like a fly attracted or a moth attracted to that light. I'm running for it,
Awesome.
Yeah. We were talking a little bit last night on the impetus of this before we got going here today, and I had mentioned to you that you had inspired some of the one of the topics I wanted to cover. I had planned to do this solo today, and I was going to write out a bunch of stuff and just kind of let her rip, and just on not quitting. And this was a couple of months back, and I was just feeling down, and I wanted to take this moment to publicly thank you on this. And I just had a rough week, and things, it's just every time I got up to bat, I struck out, and it wasn't even. It was just the losses just kept adding up, and I was feeling pretty bummed and just uninspired and not wanting to do things. And we were chatting back and forth, and it wasn't necessarily like what you said. It was just the fact that like you were out there, another person in the world going, keep trying. And that was, it wasn't any specific thing. It was just this positivity. And it was like, okay, thank you.
You're more than welcome.
Yeah, it was the right thing at the right moment. And it was more, I think it was, I don't know what it was. It was a voice recording that you had done over Instagram. And I think it was just something like, hey, listen to the last show, or listen to something you did. Thanks. Appreciate it. I really liked it. Blah, blah, blah. Have a good day, And I was like, it was the right thing at the right time. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I hope to likewise do the same for you. But that is one of the, like, for me, martial arts is more than just punches and kicks. It is my medicine, and it is my therapy, and it's what I do for the rest of my life, the rest of the world for me. It is what I do as a form of medicine.
Absolutely.
So I am a happier, kinder, more present person when I am training. And the more I train, the happier I am. And so I try and get down here as often as I can. But I was just basically the short and sweet version of what I was going to do solo. I just want to say real quick, if you're in the middle of any project, whether you're training martial arts, writing a book, making a movie, fixing your house, don't quit. Keep going. It's hard and it's struggle, and there's nothing, all of nothing comes to you without a little bit of struggle. And sometimes it's a lot of struggle, but keep going because it's all worth it.
Yeah, it was fascinating because the show, the first year, it was, we didn't know.
Yeah.
We had no idea. We didn't know. And results are different for everybody. This is not a brag. This is more of a I can't believe it's not butter kind of thing.
Yeah.
But our first year organically we had 3,000 listens, and we were stoked. And we weren't on YouTube the first year. And the second year, we started with our first interview. Shout out to Rosa May, Bionic Kung Fu. And she was our first guest. And at the time, Owen had finally set up the YouTube. And he's like, okay, we're going to do this on Spotify, part 1 and 2, and then we'll release the YouTube, blah, blah, blah. And so the second year, we started interviewing people, and we had 25,000 listens. And we're like, holy cow, this is insane. And I'm going to caveat this by saying we have not spent a dime on advertising. I'll share it with podcasts on YouTube, or not YouTube, Facebook, and then we've got our Instagram page, which I run, and I run the Facebook page too. So I'll just post stuff and I'll tag people, et cetera, and we were blown away. This year we're looking at maybe anywhere from 50 to 60,000 listens.
Wow.
And I can't. It's almost intimidating. It was, and I think it's because I'll tell you one reason too, though. Our YouTube interview with God bless him, Sifu David Peterson, who was our first guest of 2023 or 2024. I can't remember what year. Anyway, my brain, middle-aged brain, has had 5,100 views on YouTube alone. Yeah. So people love Sifu David Peterson. If you're not familiar with him, go check out our interview with him on YouTube and all platforms. He was a private student of the late great Wang Shunliang, who was known as the King of Talking Hands and kind of Yip Man's enforcer, if you will.
Okay.
And but David Peterson is a gem of a human being, and is part of the old guard, keeping it, the old fashioned, very practical, very martial way. And he's moved from Australia about a decade ago for his love of his life. And he lives in Malaysia now and teaches Wing Chun Kung Fu in Malaysia. And he absolutely loves it. And so thank you to him. But again, it was just the keep going process, like you're talking about. We didn't know. The first year, we were Ricky Bobby, and it's like, at the interview, it's like, what do I do with my hands? That was our first year. And we still have moments like that. We still run into technical difficulties. Knock on wood. I can only think of one person that's turned down the show. That's because they were very private. And it wasn't because they weren't interested in doing the show. It's just they weren't taking on any new students. They didn't want to, get out there in public and, dangle the carrot and be like, hey, I did a podcast, and everyone's going to start knocking on their door again looking for teaching, because they've kind of walked away and retired from that. So that was our only turn down. But our show's pretty much booked for interviews for another 2 to 3 years. Wow. And so, we're super stoked about that. And we have to do that, again, because we're 9-to-5ers. We have work. We're not full-time teachers. And that's another thing, too. As far as, your own show being valid and our show and a lot of these other smaller podcasts, our audience is more like us than they are with the people that have moved to China and lived with a grandmaster for a decade and now are a lineage holder.
Yeah.
God bless those people for doing that. I hope someday, maybe in my 50s or 60s, to get to do that adventure myself. I've never ruled that out. I'm still single. I don't have kids, so that is not, thrown out the window. But to the majority of listeners, they are moms, dads, daughters, sons that have 9-to-5 schedules. They're in high school. They're in college. They have a job. They're also a husband. They're also a mother. They're also all of these other roles. And on top of that, they're martial artists. And so the working class martial artist, I really believe, is a majority of our audience. And there are people like Owen and I and yourself that are also instructors that work on the side. I don't make my money through podcasting. I don't make my money through my teaching. I do it because I love it.
Yeah.
And so and I think it produces a different result. So
absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with making money from that, but
absolutely not.
The fuel and the whole reason for doing it is a little bit different. The motivation is different for sure.
Very much so. Very much so. Is there anything you'd like to ask me besides that, my friend? I got all kinds of stuff. Teaching, training, you name it.
Oh, man. Honestly, I just having you here and having somebody to bounce some stuff off of was good. And well, what do you enjoy about teaching? What is your thing? Because I'll tell you mine real fast.
Please do.
So I got thrown into teaching as of like, oh crap, I need some help. Can you come out here moment? And just jumped in without a parachute and was like, oh, I'm going to do the best I can. Hope it's fun, and really enjoyed it and just fell in love with it. But the thing that I get out of it the most, I think, is when I'm teaching somebody something, regardless of what it is having that bird's eye perspective.
Yes.
Of seeing something being done outside of my own vision, outside of me doing it, and seeing that third perspective, that third person perspective. It's like, oh, here's another reason why this is done this way. Here's why you do this. Here's why you have your hands here. Here's why your feet are standing this way. All of those things, and it's like being able to see from black and white into color.
I love that.
I 100%. Love that aspect of things. And then the other part is seeing somebody get it when they're really working on something and they've been struggling, and then all of a sudden the light switch goes on or the connection happens, and they're like, oh, wow. And that for me is that's my bread and butter. I just love those things about teaching.
Absolutely beautiful. Couldn't agree with it more. I'm going to give you two answers.
Okay.
One of them's short and sweet, and one of them's a little bit of a story. So here, let's do short and sweet first.
Sounds good.
I love that people get to have a different relationship with themselves through the system. They get to look at themselves and move in ways that they've never done, and they get to think about things and discover things about not just the system but themselves, because the system is the pathway to the self, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's not just you're executing taekwondo or jushin jitsu, which is actually not a martial art at all, and it is actually a form of therapy. It's actually acupressure that the Japanese have, or Japanese jiu-jitsu or Russian sistema. You might move like that system does, but that's you, whoever you are, moving that way. Mm-hmm. You're still Danny, you're still Johnny, you're still Susie, you're still Rebecca, you're still those people that are moving through the system of. So there's an interaction with the self and the system, and then everybody else training in that system or style, right? And that's why it's different expressions of the system, because we're all different people. So I love seeing how the individuals enrich the method, the system, the style, whatever it is. The other thing, I primarily teach Wing Chun. And it's fascinating because when Sifu Meir was first introduced to Wong Q, it was 1986, and I want to say it was at a ski lodge in Canada. It was either Inside Kung Fu or Black Belt magazine. The last page was a full-on flyer, and Wong Q was coming to Canada to teach the wooden dummy, and it was going to be a week long of training. And nobody that was a core student that high in Yip Man's cast of senior students had ever taught something that rare. So you had a senior student of Yip Man, a private student of Yip Man, teaching the wooden dummy. And when Wong Q taught Yip Man the wooden dummy, he didn't have a wooden dummy. I don't have it. I have a couple of these. It's still something I hope to learn from Sifu Meir. Wong Q learned the wooden man from Yip Man as a partner form.
Oh, really?
There's a partner form A, and there's a partner form B. Partner form A is the person doing the zhong, is the main person doing the wooden dummy movements.
Okay.
Partner form B is for a rookie student.
Wow.
Because the first sections, the rookie student is doing nothing but the Lin Wan Kyun. And then as the form goes on, the rookie student actually starts to do more advanced work. And so partner form B is how a rookie student can help out his Sifu that doesn't have a wooden dummy. But the interesting thing to me about the partner forms and why they're so special, and I can't speak for any other lineage, is when I was taught the wooden dummy and I was taught the forms, the three forms for us in Wing Chun, Sianam Tao, Chum Kyu, and Buji, are, and especially the first two forms, are the wooden dummy. They're just encoded. Think of origami, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or, it looks like a crane, but if you unfold it, it's still a piece of paper, right? Yeah. So the Wing Chun forms look like a form, but if you unfold it correctly in the right patterns, it's actually the Muk Zhong.
Oh,
okay?
Wow.
It's encrypted. Most people don't know the code to unlock it, to unfold it, right? What you might do on this plane of movement, forward and backwards, actually might be an application here. But you don't know that unless you're taught these things. And so to me, the partner forms, partner form A and B, are a missing link to show the transition from the unarmed forms to the Muk Zhong. And Wing Chun's formulaic. So to get back to Sifu Meir, when he learned, he had no previous Wing Chun experience. He was going from a hybridized system of Taekwondo that had a little bit of judo in it, a little bit of joint locks. But he loved the system and he taught it for years, but he was so bored with it that he was teaching himself the katas backwards. The thinking element, he had far surpassed that. And there was nothing stimulating him mentally anymore. It was just a physical practice. And so when he met Wong Q was a civil engineer, and Sifu Meir at the time was an architect. And so cerebrally, they hit it off perfectly. And so when Sifu Meir was up there for a week, he learned partner form A, partner form B, the wooden dummy, and a bunch of drills. And nobody signed up for that seminar. I think there was 5 or 6 people altogether. They had 2 or 3 instructors per student. So they lost a shirt on the seminar. But for the students that were there for it, they got bucket tons of information.
Yeah.
I think Sifu Mayer said he came back home with 3 or 4 different notebooks full of drills, theory, and information. And throughout the years, he would go back to Holland and train a few days at a time with Warren Q. And then eventually, he invited him for a 3-week stay. And so then he got the rest of the system taught to him. But here's the thing. When Sifu Mayer got the Wing Chun system, he got it like a Ferrari. Okay? Here it is. Now you have to be a Ferrari mechanic. So
Yeah.
what do you have? You have the moving race car fully assembled. Now you have to remove the body, take out the engine, take out the transmission system, take off the wheels, and look at how does the suspension work? How does the brakes work? How does the transmission work? How does the timing belt work? He was given a complete moving vehicle and then asked to be a mechanic. And so for the first decade, Sifu Mayer had to dissect it to make it trainable, digestible bits. Well, through the years of working with Sifu Mayer, on the seminar scene, and then as a private student, we only get together about every 3 to 4 to 5 years. So I either get a week or a couple days where he dumps years of information into my head, which is a hell of a way to learn something. But what I've had to learn is the exact opposite from what Sifu Mayer had to do. I've had to take all these little digestible, enjoyable bits and show how it makes and connects to the greater system. And so for me, I have had 7 iterations of how to introduce Wing Chun to a rookie or an intermediate student. And so for me as a teacher, that was my work. That was what I spent years of time. And now on the 7th one, 6 and 7 kind of really started to congeal. And so what I love to see is when I've had students for a while with the little bits, I give them crumbs to take the next logical steps forward. And so when I see a student be like, hey, isn't this hand just kind of this over here at a different angle? When they start thinking that way in this kind of abstract thought, then I'm like, yes, that's me doing my job. And I'm so glad that they're starting to think that way, because Wing Chun is a very linear system with around the corner thinking, right?
Yeah.
It's linear in its approach, but it's globalized in how it thinks about how it works. Take Epcot Center, right? Epcot Center is a bunch of lines and triangles that make a globe. And so when you have something that lights